Boom! Stan Efferding is in the studio. One of the strongest humans to ever walk the earth. At one point, was known as the strongest bodybuilder in the IFBB. This dude is a beast. He's also super smart. The guy's helped so many people in nutrition, professional athletes, of course, professional bodybuilders, top MMA fighters. He's a wealth of knowledge. Stan Efferding, the White Rhino. By the way, he's like in his 50s, and the guy can still lift about 3 times as much as Justin and about 15 times as much as Adam. It's insane how strong this guy is. It's crazy. Anyway, we know you're going to love this episode. Also, by the way, we have a channel called Mind Pump Clips. If you just want short, smart fitness tips and fun stuff, go to Mind Pump Clips, sign up, subscribe, and turn on those notifications. All right, here we go. Stan, welcome back to the show, man. Always great to have you on. We love what you do. I want to start out by talking about just something real basic, like the best. Let's start with some of the best foods somebody could eat for muscle, maintain a lean, healthy physique, for longevity. Generally speaking, what are some of those foods?
Boy, it sounds basic, but we can't. It's going to take me a minute to get there.
Okay.
Because you kind of got to meet the client where they're at, right? So I said, what's the best diet, the one you'll follow? And I kind of have to start there because there is no best food. There's dietary patterns that I think are more important. There's calories, obviously, if your client's got metabolic syndrome, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, high lipids, then you're considering weight loss, first and foremost, out of the gate, as a triage, right? Got a guy that comes into the emergency room and he's got a bullet wound. You're not down there clipping his toenails, okay? And I just got lambasted from my Tom Bilyeu conversation about the McDonald's diet. And Merrick reposted it. And it had over 3 million views and thousands of comments, and people were just ripping it apart because I said that 95% of health benefits are realized simply from weight loss itself, irrespective of diet, and that the weight loss is really the primary goal. So if you're asking me for general health, for somebody with presenting with some sort of metabolic syndrome, as mentioned, then weight loss is the first goal. Now there's, obviously we have to be in a calorie deficit to achieve a weight loss. And there's a number of ways to do that through calorie restriction, increased workload, or a combination of the two. And we see that calorie restriction is probably the preferable choice because more exercise doesn't equal more weight loss because of the compensation problem where people go out and crush themselves on workouts and then they start sitting more and eating more. But generally speaking, we'll start with, as far as dietary patterns go, it's cholesterol or it's calories.
Yeah. Let me pause you for a second because I want to back you up because the data is very clear on this. When you look at diets across the board, if the calories are low enough, and of course, and correct me if you or if you think you disagree, but of course there's nutrient essentials that need to be met, right? There's essential nutrients, but aside from that,
that's a different conversation. That's a second conversation,
right? So, but if calories are low, what you see health benefits. This is why you see studies on keto diet, carnivore diet, vegan diet, Mediterranean. I mean, any diet. If it gets someone to lose weight, you do see health benefits. Now, there's more to it, and I think we're kind of oversimplifying, right? Because it can influence how you feel and behaviors and stuff. Yeah. But what you're saying is 100% true, and I know that pisses people off. Yeah. But there's been professors and people who've actually shown this and said, "Hey, I'll eat fast food, and I'll show you that I can improve all my markers."
Yeah. Well, and that's absolutely true. And that's what I talked about with respect to the McDonald's diet. We have the Twinkies diet, and there's a whole host of 7-Eleven diet and the potato diet. And as long as they can achieve a calorie deficit. Actually, when you do the research, we look at the research, it suggests that the most effective diet for the shortest term reversal or regression of type 2 diabetes is an 800-calorie liquid diet. None of us, and this is what I said 5 years ago in my obesity rant, when I did the Rhinos rant on YouTube about the fattest population in the world. I was referencing my family in Samoa, my wife's family. And I said that the calorie deficit was the critical factor. But I said I would never recommend a McDonald's diet. That's the part that gets cut off.
Yeah, right. Doesn't make the full internet clip.
Right. So everybody watches that 60-second clip, and then that part gets cut off.
Right.
For a host of reasons, but the fact still remains that the deficit itself, results in the reversal of just about everything. And people say, well, what about their cholesterol? Well, We see this even with keto diets, high saturated fat keto diets. If there's weight loss, they'll see an initial reduction in LDL. Now, long term, you don't want high saturated fat in your diet, and that's where those considerations can be made. But at least initially, if you want to lower your blood pressure and you want to lower your cholesterol and you want to improve your blood sugars, weight loss for those people who have those issues, metabolic syndrome, which is north of 70% of the population, has some degree of overweight or obesity that's resulted in insulin resistance.
Right.
So again, for the vast majority of folks, I'm looking at calories are king. I want to lose weight. And then I'm start to make other considerations. Those other considerations are adherence would be second.
Very important, right? Because one of the biggest challenges with just cutting calories, so someone might listen to a clip of you talking about, oh, the data says I just got to cut my calories. But if it's a diet that makes you feel like crap or you don't like it, it's not going to work for you. And you said that earlier, the diet that you'll follow is the best diet.
100%. Yeah, I said that 800 calorie liquid diets within 7 to 10 days is going to see a significant reduction in your type 2 diabetes risk. And so you'll have improved your health. Can you maintain it? What are your energy levels like? What's your satiety like? That becomes the problem. And then you're talking about things like potentially lean muscle mass loss, which would require you to start talking about macros and exercise. Now you've got to have sufficient protein in the diet and probably some sort of resistance training. And I don't know why it always has to be kind of a dichotomous choice, an either or, diet or exercise. It's always both. And that's why we try and comprehensively put together a package of lifestyle changes for folks that would result in the most optimal change. Certainly a little bit of weight loss, some more exercise, some resistance training, optimizing the micronutrient value of the foods. Long term, that's going to give them a better weight loss maintenance result. So after we talk about calories, and then maybe we jump in there and talk about, certainly compliance is right up there. And then we're talking about protein. Are you getting sufficient protein so you're not losing lean muscle mass? And obviously, if we want to shoot for a macro amount, then we're talking about probably a gram per pound of lean weight or goal weight, 0.8 per current weight. And that's going to vary depending on the amount of obesity that an individual has. We don't want to match, 0.8 to somebody who's a 40 BMI.
So use a lean body mass, subtract the body
or
fat.
he said
or
goal
weight.
or goal.
Yeah,
I mean, you got somebody who's
weight.
300 pounds. They normally want to be down to 200 or 250.
Yeah.
So 200 grams of protein.
Yeah. And, I hate being so vague. You kind of got to be if you want to be accurate because it doesn't apply the same to everybody across the board.
Right.
But at the same time, I want listeners who are trying to lose weight to have a pretty easy to navigate hierarchy of most to least important things to concern themselves with. And so we said that, try and get into a calorie deficit. So you do your little BMR calculator on the internet and plug in your weight and your workload, and it gives you a number. And that's an estimate to start at. And the next thing you want to shoot for after you have that kind of daily calorie number is to try and fix your protein first. And I'll fix that at, let's just say, a gram per pound of goal weight. It's a pretty reasonable number. I'd assume that would be pretty near your lean weight, which is what your goal would be.
Right.
And that, does a whole host of things. Obviously, it lends itself better to preserving lean muscle tissue, although the weightlifting stimulus, as we're seeing from Stu Phillips' research that he's referenced recently, is probably as or more important than the amount of protein, because he's had some pretty limited proteins, say maybe 0.5 grams protein per pound of lean mass, still be able to retain their lean mass if they were training hard enough. I'd rather eat a little more and train at a sufficient level that's sustainable because, as mentioned earlier, you start crushing people on workouts. Not only is it such a huge departure from their regular daily, schedule or habits, that it's not very likely to become, a long-term lifestyle.
Not only that, but then you're also, theoretically, you're hoping that if and when the time comes when you do overeat a little bit, that some of those extra calories get partitioned to building muscle, right? And they go to work.
Absolutely. Yeah. That would be the goal long term, is to have sufficient muscle so that you're insulin sensitive and you can you include some carbohydrates in your diet and not feel crappy or be subject to that.
Let's back up for just a second.
See, this is slow going, isn't it?
No, this is great.
You wanted some foods.
No, that's not true.
You're actually answering it.
I love telling the audience, because we're so transparent in our show, that when we first started this conversation, we're always guided by the people who run our channels, that hey, these topics, this is what get people to click on it. And so of course, it's going to start off with that, but then if you really know your shit, it's going to be nuanced.
Yes.
Every answer should be nuanced.
And hold your question for one more second.
Yes.
We'll get there because
Okay.
my clients demand of me, Stan, just tell me what to eat.
Yeah, of course.
Here on this show, amongst this broad audience, I want to make sure we get there.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you what I think you should eat, but I want you to understand that that's not the only way to do it. And
Sure.
here's the criteria or the priorities that you should consider when you get to that.
There's an
diet
order
plan.
operation there.
Yeah. So go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, so do you notice patterns of diets that people tend to have the hardest time sticking to?
I do.
Yeah. Okay. And
Yeah.
what do those patterns tend to look like?
Yeah. And I should say, a lot of folks talk about dieting. I've been a professional dieter all my life. I've gained and lost well over 1,000 pounds throughout my career, bulking up to 300 bills to power lift and dieting down to single digit body fat to compete in bodybuilding. And I've trained people all my life. I was a trainer in college to get by, and studied exercise science, worked in gyms, was a coach. I own a gym now. I've owned multiple gyms over the years. I train people now. And we just started a 90-day fit challenge that over 200 people entered, and they're all dad bods and soccer moms, gen pop people. These aren't athletes. I know I always get the accolades from training the famous athletes, and people associate me with that. But the fact of the matter is the vast majority of people I train are weight loss people.
Here's the giveaway for today's episode, MAPS Powerlift. This is the powerlifting-based MAPS program. Here's how you win. Leave a comment below in the first 24 hours that we drop this episode. So as soon as we drop this episode, within those first 24 hours, leave a comment. Also, subscribe to this channel. Also, turn on notifications. If you do all those things and we like your comment, we'll notify you in the comment section that you won free access to MAPS Powerlift. If we like your comments, we got to like it though. Also, we got a sale going on this month. MAPS Symmetry and MAPS Strong, both 50% off. Only happening this month. If you're interested, click on the link at the top of the description below to get signed up. All right, here comes the show. Patterns that you notice, because it's so important to be able to stick to and adhere to something. Do you notice patterns in diets where you're like, okay, yes, the calorie deficit's going to be there, but these types of patterns tend to lead to people falling off?
Yeah. Too big a changes right out of the gate, as I mentioned with training. When you try and completely change somebody's diet and you throw them into that guru bodybuilder bikini girl diet with egg whites and tilapia and chicken breast and broccoli and a scoop of peanut butter, which becomes a shovelful of peanut butter by the end of the diet. That, is a pretty good recipe for failure. And so I usually ask my clients, I send them a detailed questionnaire and, ask them what they like to eat. I give them some scores and a whole list of foods. As to what do you prefer? What do you not enjoy? I wouldn't want to include, dietary items in diet recommendations that were things that they absolutely despised or, couldn't stomach. And so I ask them what they want to eat first. And then I try and, again, as part of this slow transfer from where they're at to where they want to be, it's not 0 to 100, it's 0 to 1, 1 to 2. If they're sitting on the couch all day watching TV, if you just get up and take a walk or two. If they're drinking, sugar sweetened beverages, if you can just get them to a diet soda, that's a significant change.
Sure.
And you can see some weight loss. Probably as mentioned, we talked about calories in general. The next thing I'm really looking at beyond compliance as kind of a global metric is protein. And what I find is, particularly with women, they vastly underconsume protein, particularly for breakfast, which now we're seeing all the research.
With blood sugar and insulin and all that stuff.
Yeah. Remember, everything was intermittent fasting, skipping breakfast. Now it's early time restricted feeding all of a sudden. I think it was some 5 years ago when I did that Iceland seminar. I said, eat like a king for breakfast, a prince for lunch, and a pauper for dinner.
Was it Jack LaLanne that said that first?
I think so, yes. And that's another thing that's important is that we see these trends come and go, and none of this is new. Even with the vertical diet, I've said a lot of this stuff was around in the 60s with Arnold and Vince Gironda, was talking about, the kind of protein sources and that they should be eating. So, I never claim to invent things. I just, from my personal experience and that of my clients, and then from the literature that I think is most widely accepted, understanding there's a study to support, just about any opinion in this industry. But that doesn't mean they're all equivalent in terms of whether or not, the vast majority of the industry or I think the academics that we got a consensus on these things. So I chase protein, and I chase a big protein breakfast right out of the gate would be the best. And now we're seeing that's important for chrononutrition. We're seeing that's important for blood sugar control and appetite control in subsequent meals throughout the day, not just the breakfast, for lean mass retention and stopping the catabolism from the extended overnight absence of eating. So breakfast seems to be the big meal. And so I'll tell most of the ladies that I talk to in particular, guys tend to eat more and they tend to trend towards higher protein foods generally, so it's not as big an issue. But if you tell them that you want them to get 30 plus and maybe 40 grams of protein for breakfast, they're a long ways off because generally they're eating like 1 egg and a bagel.
Right.
And so I'm like, yeah, you're right. I'm like, that's 6 grams.
Yeah.
Where do we get the other 25 to 35 from? So I have to show them a host of different options and ways to make that happen. I need this many ounces of a meat source, whether it's chicken or fish or eggs or even yogurt. And once they see the size of that, and I guess initially the the impression would be that that's a lot of food. Mm-hmm. But the calorie density of a lean protein is very minimal as compared to, even one of those muffins at Starbucks might be 700 or 800 calories.
Yeah.
But 40 grams of protein is 160 calories. And so if I can get them to that 40 grams with a lean source, maybe a fat-free Greek yogurt, maybe a 96.4 beef or a top sirloin steak or some chicken breast or blending an egg white combo, but just so they understand the quantity of that. So I think we're finally starting to slowly get to the original question that was asked is what kind of foods do I recommend? Yeah. And it would be, low calorie density, high protein. I usually kind of shoot for a 2-to-1 protein to fat ratio, generally speaking, if they want to quickly look at a label or, check a menu on at a restaurant. That's kind of where I start at. And then I guess secondarily, I'm looking at satiety, which protein lends itself well to that. Because the number one people fail on diets is hunger. I mean, that's really it.
Oh yeah.
And we see that in spades now with the new diet medication that's largely promoted, the semaglutide.
That's it.
Yeah.
Because mainly that's what it does.
That's all it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a fat burner.
No.
It just
makes you eat less.
It makes you eat less. Period. And so if we can use the tools available to us without the need of medication, and not suggesting semaglutide isn't a viable option for those people who need it, but at $1,000 a month, there's certainly a barrier to entry there. I would suggest that we would use every tool available for satiety. And then I have this satiety list. And when in my 90-day challenge, that was one of the first things I sent out. I said, here's a list of tools you have in your toolbox that are going to help you to become satiated. And here's some things that might actually add to your hunger. And we want to try and curb those things. And so I kind of go down the list of things for satiation. And eating that high protein breakfast, getting a significant sleep is kind of even before the breakfast. People who sleep less tend to have higher ghrelin hormone release and are just hungrier during the day. Plus, I also think just being up 18 plus hours a day gives you more opportunity to get hungry and have another meal, especially as it gets into the evening. So the longer you sleep, the less hours you're awake, the more likely it is you'll be able to satiate yourself with that 3 meals that most people probably trend towards. And then those are high protein meals. And now we've got satiety. Protein, obviously the high thermic effect of food, the satiety benefit. Fiber is throw in plenty of fiber, eat more oats. There's a couple of vegetables, fruits. There's a couple of foods that are on this high satiety index, which is an index that has measured how people respond to certain foods and how long they stay hungry. And that's like potatoes, boiled potatoes and oranges. They're like at the highest of the index. If I throw boiled potatoes in with a high lean protein source and maybe a salad and a couple pieces of fruit, people tend to be satiated longer. We see this in research on, say, women with PCOS. They just tend to have leptin resistance. They have more visceral fat, and that central adiposity results in interruption in leptin and hunger signals. So they're hungry more often. And we used to think that they had a lower basal metabolic rate or metabolism was slower, but in fact,
They just eat more.
they do just eat more. And it's not, and you hate blaming the victim. It's not a matter, this isn't a discipline issue. This isn't a willpower issue. That's not a good strategy.
They've got all the hunger drivers.
100%.
Yeah.
I couldn't, I've dieted for bodybuilding shows, as we've all dieted. You get down to single digit body fat and that's all you think about is food.
Yeah.
I can remember times going to bed at night and just dreaming. I could see my pizza being made.
Oh, that's so funny. I'd have dreams like
I didn't dream about food until I competed.
Yeah.
That was never a thing for me.
Oh my God,
entire
yeah.
life, I never dreamt about food until I competed, and then that became a regular dream.
Yeah, and your wife's just pissed because she'll be next to you butt naked, and you're like, nah, I'm hungry. I'm thinking about food. That just becomes not even a consideration. Some of that might be the lowered testosterone from the calorie restriction, etc. But I used to work in a pizza place when I was a teenager, and I could actually visually see the pizza going through the conveyor, and the pepperoni curling and browning on the edges, and the cheese bubbling, and those are the dreams I'd have. And I remember one time I put all my friends in the car and I drove up to Seattle and got a brick oven pizza up there and watched them all eat it. Yeah, just so I could have that. Yeah, and I didn't have any because I was on a diet. I had my little chicken breast and whatever.
Take a bite and then breathe on me.
Yeah, and they were
Describe it.
They were just astounded that they were like, "Sure, you don't want one?" I'm like, "Yeah, I do."
Yeah.
But the point is that we have to be sympathetic to the fact that this isn't a willpower issue. These aren't undisciplined people. They just have hunger cues that a lot of us who claim to be more disciplined simply don't have. Probably because we tend to eat more protein, tend to eat more whole foods.
I think that's. And by the way, what you're saying, I think is I think it's very good to talk about, because then people can go to the next step, which is, okay, I have these strong hunger drivers. Well, what can I do that'll lower versus it's just willpower? And now I don't change it.
How do I get to where the impetus, where the desire lessens, right?
Yes.
How it's manageable hunger, it's not hanger. And that's what we'd like to do, is get them there. And as I mentioned, if you've got visceral adiposity and you've got poor sleep and sleep apnea, you got to go all in on that first. If you've got insufficient lean body mass, you've got to go all in on those things first. You got to get a CPAP, get your sleep fixed. You've got to obviously lose as much visceral fat as you can, as quickly as you can, to get yourself in a position where you even have a fighting chance. And then use these tools, the higher protein.
Go a little deeper on that, Stan, because that's something that it took me a long time to actually connect these dots. And I vividly remember what house, when it happened, and like finally making this connection. And that was some of the most challenging times that I ever had with fighting off cravings was when I was in a diet and when I had poor sleep. Yeah. Like just a rough night that night, and then the next day, I could have been I was consistent on the diet, workouts, everything's perfect. Not even really thinking that bad about other foods. I'm happy I'm content with my healthy choices. Then all of a sudden I had a rough night, and then the next day, I'm thinking about is bad food.
And that's what we talked about with the hormone signaling. Your body releases ghrelin, and you just become voraciously hungry. It's even worse than that. You guys have heard me say before, if you're waking up at 4 a.m. to do fasted cardio after 5 hours of sleep, you're stepping over $100 bills to pick up nickels, because
wow,
good analogy.
Very good point.
Waking up after a short sleep and then training is counterproductive, because you lose more muscle than fat. Your body becomes stingy with the fat and will burn the muscle preferentially as part of its defense mechanism. This is Dr. Matthew Walker's research that he's spoken about many times. And so I'm really cautious. I would much rather you get the sleep. That's why I don't assign, and this is kind of an aside, I don't assign cardio to my clients, including competitive clients. I don't assign like a 40-minute cardio session. Not terribly effective, not terribly enjoyable, certainly not sustainable. You don't see anybody, it's too many barriers to entry. I got to get changed. I got to get in my car. I got to go to the gym. I got to put 40 minutes on this treadmill. With a career and families and other obligations, that's the first thing that goes by the wayside.
Agreed. Yep.
Can I get that stimulus in far more effectively and more sustainably from somewhere else? And hence there, is the 10-minute walks, which everybody's heard me talk about ad nauseum. But it replaces that 40 minutes of cardio The timing of it post-meal lends itself better to insulin control, the postprandial glycemia elevations, digestion. It's more convenient. It's something that you can do in a busy day, whether it's walking the kids to school or, at night before bed, just taking a brisk 10-minute walk. If you setting yourself up for failure, if the proposal is that you're going to do a 30 or 40-minute cardio session a day, where does that fit in and how sustainable is it?
You're also attaching it to a behavior and habit that you already have, which all the research is very clear on the success rate of that, which I think is the magical part of the 10-minute walk.
It took me so when training clients, do you know how long it took me to figure that out? To figure out that no, instead of doing 30 minutes or 40 minutes of cardio, why don't you just walk 10 minutes after? Now, how long did it take you to figure that? Because I'm assuming in your 20s, maybe 30s, you were like, oh yeah, get on the treadmill twice a day, 30 minutes. How long did it take you to piece that together?
Well, remember, I was powerlifting, so the concept back then was don't run if you can walk, don't stand if you can sit, and don't stay awake if you can sleep. Just shut it down. And just pound as many calories as you can, and it didn't matter what kind of calories there were. Both of those things were dead wrong. Obviously, don't recommend any of that.
I think we all at one point lived by that.
Yeah, the dirty bulking, and not just the excess calories leading to excess body fat, but the amount of saturated fat I would consume with ice cream and fatty meats and all that kind of stuff. But with bodybuilding, I found that the excessive cardio for me had a bit of an interference effect. Form follows function. My body on a treadmill, my legs would start to shrink, and I would lose muscle mass going into a bodybuilding show. And again, it just wasn't terribly sustainable. So in 2009, when I was trained with Flex Wheeler, he didn't let me do any cardio, zero. 1 year prior, I did a ton of cardio, and I did chicken breast and egg whites, and that's when I had the pizza dreams. And I weighed in at 223 and won the Emerald Cup up in Seattle in 2008. I trained with Flex Wheeler, and this was about 6 months of the whole 6 or 7 months of the whole process. The last 3 I spent with him here in San Jose. Matter of fact, I stayed at the same hotel last night. It was kind of nostalgic.
Oh, wow.
Right across from the 24-hour fitness that I trained at every day for 3 months. And lived there at that, I forget what it was called at the time. Its name has changed, but it had a full kitchen and 2 bedrooms, and me and Keith Williams trained with Flex. And one of the things I remember from that time is when you're dieting for a show, and he would have us stop in at Carl's Jr., because he wasn't dieting, and get him a breakfast, and he would get those crisp-cut fries.
Oh, God.
And
those are so good.
Those things smell amazing. And he's sitting there in the car eating these on our way to the gym, and Keith and I are just like white-knuckling like this, But we were eating a lot. He had us eating almost 4 pounds of top sirloin steak a day.
Wow.
About 6 meals a day, 10 ounces a meal, cooked on a Foreman grill. You know how tough that stuff is? It's like eating leather. And
Good 2 years of my life was on the Foreman grill.
Yeah. So where did I go off? Where did I lose track here? I knew I was going to.
Well, just when you piece together it's just the walks instead of doing.
So he had me do no cardio, and I weighed in. This is 1 year later. I was 223 on the Emerald Cup stage, and I won the overall at the Emerald Cup. 1 year later at Masters Nationals, I weighed in at 252.
Whoa.
In really similar condition.
30 more pounds and just damn near as
of lean body mass.
Oh.
Yeah, but it wasn't a story of how much muscle I gained. It was a story about how much fat or how much muscle I didn't lose.
Right.
Yeah, and that's the key, by the way. So anybody listening right now who has they just don't care about being a bodybuilder or being that big or whatever, the lesson here is you can get lean and lose less muscle. And you don't want to lose muscle. That's your fat burning machinery.
100%. I was 270 before both of those preps.
Wow. So the other one you went all the way down to 223, and this one just down to.
Very common. I can't remember the name of the gentleman. It was a long time ago who was, he would bulk up to 300 plus pounds.
Like Lee Priest used to do that.
And then
Lee
diet
Priest
down
used to do
to
that.
236. And it just wouldn't look very good. It was just, you'd lose a lot of muscle in the process. So you're right. You don't want to gain too much fat in your gain phases, and you don't want to lose muscle in your loss phases. So you just have to be a little more patient, a little more gradual about it. So to keep this story going, I learned that in the absence of cardio, I was still able to get really lean. And the workouts, we were working out twice a day with high volume and short rest periods. They were plenty sufficient for me to have a significant, cardiovascular health from that. It was extraordinary the amount of volume Flex put us through with 20 rep sets, 2-minute rest, squatting down between sets. It was challenging. We were in deep water a lot. So then I went to train with Mark Bell. And we started squatting heavy. Initially, of course, from dieting down, I wasn't that strong, but within just a matter of a few weeks, especially from eating and getting my weight back up, I was able to start getting stronger. And we were squatting some weeks over 800 pounds pretty consistently, week after week. And I wasn't recovering because I stopped the movement. I was just resting. I was applying my 90s mentality, and I would just go home and just sit and lay there. And I would have DOMs for 3 or 4 days. And so I got a recumbent bike and I put it in my hotel room. It was up in Sacramento where I was training with Mark. And I started immediately, Sunday after we would train, that evening I would ride the recumbent bike for 10 minutes. And why the recumbent bike over walking was just because it was a greater range of motion, less impact on my knees. It was real low impact, all concentric. Yeah. And I could do little hit session. I could bike against modest tension for 50 seconds reasonably fast and then rest for 10 or 15 and do 10 of those. And I started doing them 3 times a day. I wake up the next morning and do that, next afternoon and do that, next evening and do that. And I found that my DOMs would go away within easily 48 hours.
Yeah.
As opposed to
accelerates recovery.
100%. Yeah. And my appetite was better, which was important, meaning in that instance, which is kind of a dual benefit to the 10-minute walks or bikes, is that it helped me digest my food faster, but it also, we see that people who get their 6,000 to 10,000 steps a day have a better satiety effect for people who are doing weight loss, as opposed to overtraining and having that compensatory, get hungry and sit more effect. It's kind of that's just that walking somewhere around, I don't know what the measurement is, 5,000, 6,000 steps kind of lends itself well as one of the tools in the toolbox for satiety is to take those walks. So
I think that there's so much value that the average person can learn from bodybuilding that they don't pay attention to because they look at a bodybuilder and they see an extreme body, right? They look at the highest level of building muscle and getting shredded and they say, okay, I don't want to look anything like that, or that's just unachievable for me. And so I'm not going to listen to anything. But what bodybuilders have done have mastered the art of maintaining muscle and keeping a fast metabolism. Bodybuilders,
which is ironic because that's what the pursuit of every
that's exactly what you want.
Like when your client comes to you and they say, I want to be in better shape, and you could say, hey, would you like a faster metabolism, look better, feel better? And of course they would all say yes. And that's the
and I chuckle a little because that gets people to thinking, well, I don't want to look like that. And it's like, well,
good luck.
You won't, don't worry, you won't.
You don't wake up one morning and be like, oh my God, I'm Ronnie Coleman. What happened? I squatted too hard yesterday. It is.
I've tried and it doesn't happen.
My first bodybuilding show in 1986, I was 158 pounds, soaking wet in the novice lightweight class. It took me a long, long time, and it's years and years and years of force feeding and crushing workouts. I mean, the idea that somehow you're going to wake up one morning and be like, oh, I went too far.
Yeah.
It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So
but the lessons are great because for the average person, what they can learn from bodybuilding pursuits is how to do less work, get leaner, and have a faster metabolism, which, if you think of the context of modern life, if you go 10,000 years ago, you don't want a fast metabolism, right? You want a slow metabolism so you can be efficient.
Right.
But now, if you want to maintain your health, what'll buffer it, or one of the best buffers you can have is to have muscle and be able to burn it off just sitting there.
What you just said has started to crest now amongst all of the longevity people. Well, there's a couple of holdouts, Dr. Walter Longo and David Sinclair, neither of which could fight themselves out of a wet paper bag. They're 120 pounds of wispy noodle. And they're the only ones still saying, restrict protein because mTOR and because mice, but everyone else, even Dr. Peter Attia, who was fully invested in ultra endurance athletics and the keto, intermittent fast, multiple day fast, call it an obsession at this point, which she's that kind of guy, genius, brilliant guy. And we talked briefly before we came on, and I said, look, I've been doing this for well over 30 years. I don't claim to be any smarter than any of these people, but I've been there before. I've seen it. I've done it. I've had hundreds, if not thousands of clients now that we've witnessed. I'm just patient. I just see these things come around over and over again. And when somebody's pissing on keto sticks for 3 years straight and showing you the results, I just wait. Patiently wait. And sure enough, they all come around eventually. I went on Paul Saladino's podcast and told him about the great benefits of carbohydrates and how, yes, I eat fruit and even white rice because I want to crush fantastic workouts and have pumps and build muscle and be strong. And he was fully keto, carnivore, intermittent fast at the time. And now look, he's eating carbs, particularly around workouts.
Yeah, fruit.
Mike Mutzel's podcast. And I love Mike, brilliant guy, smarter than me. But I sat there on his podcast some years ago when he was keto and intermittent fast. And I said, look, you can get to the top of the Empire State Building using the stairs. I'm taking the elevator. And if you want to get the most out of your workouts, that anaerobic lifting, you're going to want to consume some carbs. So now Mike consumes carbs around workouts. They all do now. The only holdout is who is it?
Sinclair.
No, why is his name? Carnivore Doc.
I know. I can't remember his name.
Doc, we had him on here.
I feel terrible.
I know.
We've had him on here.
Yeah,
Shame on,
I was
Doug,
on
come
his
on, Doug.
podcast. Why am I losing it? now?
Big guy too. Why
he likes the row.
I cannot think of his name
Yeah.
right now. Is he held up still completely? He's only been still steak, still
steak.
ribeyes every
Yeah.
day.
You know, I'll tell you what
No
though. I
carbs.
think
Sean Baker.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Love
Shame
Sean.
on all
what
of
a
us.
freak.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I tell you, I think there definitely are, and I do want to say this. I think there definitely are outliers in the sense that, you know, a carnivore diet is the ultimate elimination diet.
Sure.
And if you have, you know, autoimmune reactions to foods and you can't identify what the hell is going on, and you eat foods and you get reactions, you get inflammation and you feel terrible, like going down to the most fundamental food, which would be meat, right? It's one of the most nutrient dense foods. You're going to feel a lot better. So I think there are definitely individuals that fall in that category, but it's way less than what they would have you believe.
Well, not only that, I would always make the case too that, you know, there's something in there that they obviously eliminated that makes them feel so much better. But was it every single carb?
Right,
Was it?
right.
And would you do better with, you know, some blueberries and
As
raspberry?
compared to what? Did you just get off the standard American diet?
Yeah,
That's true.
right.
Almost any of those interventions,
Yes.
you know, hopefully get you away from the standard American diet.
Yeah.
No question. But as I mentioned, I think it might be over restrictive for most people long term in terms of compliance, and you could certainly
It's for sure.
It's for sure, and there's compelling evidence now that the that gut microbiome is pretty important for a lot of things. For immune system and for cholesterol control, particularly LDL.
it gets very limited when you cut your diet that way.
It really does. So even beyond the performance benefits of the carbs, there's also, and that's why I've always had fruits and vegetables in the diet, but I've addressed those people with IBS and who need an elimination diet to kind of start with the FODMAP diet, which is much more diverse, over 100 food items in there that to me was more inclusive than what was going on, as far back as when I've been training women for shows since the late 80s, early 90s. Doing that old guru diet with the egg whites and protein powder and broccoli, the FODMAP diet's far more inclusive. And also, keeping red meat in, keeping the egg yolk in, keeping dairy in, keeping fruit in, all the things that provide all those other nutrition benefits. So now we're talking about more foods, which was the original question. What kind of foods would I recommend?
Yeah.
And we got through calories and protein intake.
40 minutes later.
and then kind of just got off on all of this compliance and satiety, and those are probably more important than the foods themselves, which is why we started.
I 100% agree.
If I come right out of the gate like, don't eat this and don't eat that, I've since avoided saying don't eat this, don't eat that. You get crucified by the academics in the industry for fear that doesn't apply to everyone. And I've always said that even with the elimination diets, it's individualistic, it's dose dependent, how the foods are prepared matters, it's cumulative in nature. I mean, there's a whole host of things that you can go through to set up those criteria. I think Alan Oregon does probably the best job of this with his flexible diet, which is kind of an improved, if it fits your macros, which was bastardized into Pop-Tarts and protein powder, by just talking about the fact that if we would eat more whole foods and less ultra-processed foods, and not necessarily because the ultra-processed foods are poison, but because all the research suggests that you'll eat more calories as a result. Just all the stuff we've been talking about in terms of satiety. And even in that post that I did on Merrick's site, that was run on Merrick's site, most of the people who responded were like, "Oh, that stuff's poison. You're going to get cancer, and you've got chemicals." But you ask for a reference. What kind of chemicals are you speaking of specifically? It's bread, meat, pickles, tomatoes, and nobody can really name a specific chemical or a dose with respect to these even processed foods. It's just the lack of satiety and the overconsumption of those foods that results in
the behaviors,
the adiposity.
It's the behaviors that comes with it.
This is why, in my opinion, I'd love your input on this. This is why we have old data, which you can counter very strongly, but you have old data that shows that high sodium cause heart disease and cancers, or
with an
high
associated increase in blood pressure.
Okay, right.
High sodium with an associated increase in blood pressure.
Right, but I'm going to go further. Right, then there was high fat. Oh, it was high fat that's causing it. And then it was it's the carbs and the sugars.
High fat with high saturated fat for those individuals who don't have adequate clearance can increase LDL and be unhealthy.
And I'll take it a step further. Right, look at the three main ingredients that make foods hyperpalatable: salt, fat, and sugar.
100%.
And so if you don't control for how much people are eating, you're going to essentially find people that eat a lot of salt, a lot of fat, and a lot of sugar are going to have all these problems, but it's mainly because they're probably eating foods that make them overeat.
Those are the most delicious foods.
That's right. And so if you look at the consumption of ultra-processed foods, and it's
which are engineered to be the best at all those things.
Yeah, and how much of our diets are made up of ultra-processed foods. If you line those charts up, you'll see obesity matches it quite nicely. So it's not the sugars, the fats, and the salt. It's the fact that more of our diet now, I think something like 65 to 70% of the average person's diet in America is ultra processed.
You're right, north of 70%.
Yeah, and the data is very clear. Yeah. They have great studies. I mean, they have crossover studies where they put people in controlled. How often do we have controlled diet studies, right?
500 calories a day in overconsumption.
On average. Yeah. And without people counting or anything, that just makes them want to eat more.
Yeah.
So the reason why those things are connected to all these poor outcomes is because they're just eating more food.
Yeah.
That's really the main thing.
Now we have to be careful not to be arrogant or classist about these recommendations, because not everybody can afford the whole foods or has the time or resources or the cooking capabilities to make these healthy meals or healthier meals or lower calorie meals. We see that in lower socioeconomic neighborhoods that are, just covered with fast food places as a matter of convenience and cost and certainly taste. That is a bigger issue. And so I've since started backing away from general recommendations about the obesity epidemic because it isn't just about the food; it's about the socioeconomic conditions that are involved as well. And I have once said that I didn't think government involvement was a good path, because people should have the opportunity to make those choices for themselves. And some people like a snack here or there, and it doesn't adversely affect their health in the whole 80-20 scheme of things with the flexible dieting. But in fact, it appears that if you want to make any significant inroads on the population as a whole, it probably will take some sort of intervention to prevent folks from having.
I'm not a fan of that argument,
and I hate it.
I'm not a fan.
I really
of that.
do.
I'm not a fan. Of that
I just don't know a more effective solution.
Yeah, but it's just.
I don't think the government.
I hear where you're coming from, and I know that you've probably been attacked many times for not, saying it that way to be more politically correct. But I just think that's such.
Well, I think government.
I think it's a bullshit excuse. Do I think that there's some people? Absolutely, and my heart breaks for that. But we can find a way to marginalize almost.
Yeah,
and
everything.
Adam, you grew up that way.
Yeah. So that wasn't the reason, right? Like, if anything, it's actually the lack of education and understanding.
I hear you.
To me,
and that's what Brown University said with respect to the Samoans, and they actually sent people in to educate them about their dietary choices.
Yes, and I don't know if we are doing them a service by giving them that out. That because you're lower middle class or you're poor. And so you get the excuse to eat these processed foods and this bad shit because you don't have access to it. I mean, we had what's her name? Melissa.
Yeah.
And I remember we didn't say anything about that when she said that on the show. And I'm just like, man, this is that woke message that's coming right now that we always got to be so careful about we are not helping people by not educating them and not explaining to them, by letting them take the victim role out. Are you think we're helping?
Well,
do you think we're helping?
I don't. And I'll tell you what. I think it's education mainly because you can be very inexpensive with foods that have high shelf lives like rice, beans,
potatoes,
fruits and vegetables. You can buy frozen vegetables, which they last a long time, very easy to prepare. I think now availability, but that's a consumer driven thing, right? So what the consumers buy is what you tend to get more of. I think it has a lot to do with education. I mean,
listen, we lived on food stamps. We had churches that gave us food, and when I looked at the stuff, if you actually broke down, if you did it mathematically, the dollars. We had plenty of Coke and sodas and ice creams and that what we would get. And you did the math on all that. And then you went and you bought all those foods and you ate that. We wouldn't starve. And two, we would be much healthier and you could make it happen. Yeah. So I just hate that. And I know why you're doing it and you're saying it. And I totally understand.
Now you know why I don't talk about it. The obesity epidemic.
Boy, it fucking annoys. It annoys the shit out of me. We had a guest on our show not that long ago. We didn't say nothing about it when it came up. And I'm just not going to let it slide.
Yeah. And also,
I don't think if you really care, which I want to believe everybody in this room really does, care about trying to solve that issue, the answer is not being concerned about marginalizing those people or, not talking about the victim, we already have a problem with victimhood in this country. Yeah. Yeah. So that's not solving
rant. I did say this. I said that we all want to play pin the tail on the donkey and find an enemy to blame for this. And I said the enemy is also the victim. You're at war with yourself. The source of the problem is also the only solution. And I think that kind of navigates us to where, hey, yeah, there's a lot of reasons why, but ultimately you're the only person that's going to be able to make the change. And I don't think these people are not knowledgeable about the fact that they're overeating and undermoving.
No.
I don't think it's that they don't know that. When we talk about education, maybe they just don't have these strategies potentially in place, or they're just exposed to a greater degree. And again, have all those preconditions of, visceral adiposity and obesity and the hunger signaling and all the other stuff. So they're more driven to be hungry, as we've felt in
I'll even take it a step further. Okay, you have subsidies that make certain foods less expensive, and when in reality they shouldn't be. You can buy sodas sometimes cheaper than you can buy water because the corn syrup is subsidized through taxpayers. So now I'm going to go buy a Coke. And it's 2-liter Coke is cheaper than buying water. So let's just drink some Coke with our meal. So that's one big problem. And then the education that a lot of people do get comes through government. And this is why I hate government involvement. Had you followed any of the government's guidelines for diet, you'd be very unhealthy. Even till this day, some of their guidelines, and they're so far behind. It's incredible. I mean, their exercise guidelines are far behind. We finally have studies showing that strength is an important metric to measure for longevity. You know how long it's taken them to even admit that strength training or strength is important? Yeah. It's been just now we're starting to see that. Yeah. I mean,
not just important, it's the primary driver. And I would even suggest, and Pat Davidson mentioned this at his seminar, Dr. Pat Davidson, I went down to Florida and attended his seminar. We were talking about VO2 max and cardiovascular fitness, but that's dependent upon lean mass. Yeah. That's what utilizes the oxygen. So you can have elderly people with sarcopenia with poor cardiovascular fitness, primarily as a result of the fact that they have muscle wasting.
Oh yeah,
and so that would I would suggest that the muscle building and the strength is the primary driver. Muscle mass for things like overcoming serious illness or injury, and then strength, of course, has been shown to be kind of the leading indicator of all-cause mortality, which I use this as an opportunity every time I can to how I love Mark Bell, and I just like to dig at him every chance I get. But I say two things. I say one that I've lived by Mark's philosophy all my life. Strength is never weakness. Weakness is never strength. Anything that made me weaker, I was very quick to take that out of my program. Sure. And I have a list of things that make you weak. I talked about metformin and antibiotics and even icing and things like anti-estrogens, and had a whole list of things that I don't want my clients doing because I think it makes you weaker. These are for strength athletes. Right. I'm not going to talk about metformin in terms of its potential benefits for people who have type 2 diabetics, but I'm just saying, generally speaking, it compromises metabolic function and it impedes the anabolic response from training, both cardiovascularly and muscularly. So That's why I mentioned it, but I don't want to get too far down the road on that. But, Mark has always said that weakness is never a strength, and I use that as kind of a measurement. And as you know, and as you just said, that we use grip strength as a proxy to measure someone's strength in comparison to other people in the group, and then look at the mortality rates, and we see that those with the best grip strength have the longest lifespans and health spans associated with that. And of course, then everybody ran out and started doing dead hangs.
Yeah. They missed the boat, didn't they?
Yeah, they missed the point. But again, just a proxy. You could have done a leg extension or a calf press or a bicep curl. But whatever measurement it was, everybody would run out and do that thing.
Yeah.
But it's overall strength. And then, of course, if I wanted to optimize that, I would get them to do the most beneficial strengthening exercises, which would almost always incorporate the largest muscle groups, legs and back in particular.
How do you feel about, because years ago when we first started the podcast, I would talk about how I thought that creatine would become, because it's always been popular, or it's been popular for a long time in strength training and bodybuilding. But I talked about how I thought it was going to be the next wellness supplement. And I think that they're going to recommend it to older people and the kids.
Well, now with the cognitive benefits, it is. They almost want to put it in the water.
You're seeing all these different things. Yeah. Do you think it's going to become this supplement now that we just give to most people?
Yeah, I certainly recommend it across the board, men and women both who are trying to strength train, and there's just no reason not to. Obviously, I have a higher red meat intake, and so I kind of don't respond as well. Plus, performance-enhancing drugs is a whole different world, and so you got to kind of take it out of that realm. And creatine offers a measurable benefit for natural athletes, and there's certainly no reason not to. It's one of the most studied and most, I think, beneficial supplements as supplements go. That would be the one I would suggest. I don't even necessarily consider protein powder a supplement. It's food in a can. Yeah. That's all it is, just convenient and tastes good. But as supplements go, if you're going to look at creatine and beta-alanine and those kinds of supplements, creatine's probably the one that works for most people pretty consistently. It's assuming some people have to be a little cautious about how much they consume in any one bolus, because it can cause some gastrointestinal effects.
Now, going back to processed food consumption, we're seeing now, and this is the first time in my career that I've seen diets become politicized. Diets have always, it's always been kind of an issue where
it's a religion.
Yeah, right. But we're starting to see it now become politicized, where people are now told you shouldn't eat meat because it's bad for the environment. You shouldn't eat meat because it's also bad for your health. And we're going to shame or fear people into avoiding meat, which in my opinion is just going to drive them to eat more processed foods. Because if you look at, like we said earlier, the average American's diet, 70% processed foods, the 30% that's left over is usually meat, milk, and eggs. And you cut that. So how do you feel about that?
We see that in vegan diets too. They're just improperly applied. Same would be true with eating meat. It's generally, most of that stuff is confounded by the healthy user bias and the dietary pattern overall for people who consume the most meat. Smoke more, drink more, exercise less, weigh more, and tend to eat bacon double cheeseburgers with soda or hot dogs and a lot of processed meats. But if you're looking at a top sirloin steak, it's 5 grams of fat, 1.5 grams of saturated fat, and it's got a 2-to-1 protein to fat ratio. So let's just look at it. And I don't mean to get too far into the math on it, but if your recommendations are to eat 30 to 35% protein as a percentage of total calories, and I hate using percentage because some lighter women probably need more protein to reach.
As a percentage.
I would just say total grams of protein. Right. 150-pound woman, I might want her to have 130 grams of protein, and that might push north to 40% of total calories if she's dieting. So I'm kind of cautious. And so now my recommendation, at least, is that you need a sufficient amount of fats for general health. Every membrane and cell membrane in the body is a lipid bilayer, and you need to move A, D, and K around. And I put that number in at about 30%. It's a pretty healthy range. You get under 20%, you probably start to see some compromise in hormone function, testosterone in particular. And so if 30% of your diet is fat as a percentage of total calories, and 30% of those fats is saturated fat, such as in a top sirloin steak or an egg, it gets even lower if you're looking at a fat-free Greek yogurt. Dairy doesn't seem to have an adverse cardiovascular impact, although we still recommend maybe a 2% or 1% because of that milk fat globule membrane that's somewhat protective of its effect and any adverse effect on LDLs. So as you can see, I'm diluting as we go here. 30% fat as a percentage of total calories, 30% saturated fat as a percentage of total fats already puts you at 9%. That's below the AHA's recommendation of 10% saturated fat in the diet. And that's just if you ate red meat, a lean red meat, as your only protein source to reach those macros. And I've just discussed that when you throw in an egg white blend and you throw in some fat-free Greek yogurt and you throw in a piece of salmon and those kinds of things, obviously, now you're in a pretty good space. So again, we're back to dietary pattern rather than picking out a particular food and trying to demonize that food individually. And look, I've been what would you say? I've been all over the place talking about how I thought seed oils were terrible for 5 years, and different seed oils, of course, because I was allergic to them. And I said, look, I'm biased. This is in my video on seed oils. They are a poison to me. They give me gastric distress, so I don't include them. 70% plus of the seed oils that we consume are in ultra-processed foods, and we consume over 70% ultra-processed foods in our diet. But even that, I've had to revise my, my opinion on whether or not that's bad for you.
Is it more of it depends now?
It's more of what's the context. If you replace saturated fats with it, it seems to have a health benefit. But that would be such like butter, palm oil, coconut oil, the things that are super, super high in saturated fats, assuming they get you north of 10, 12%, certainly up to 18% saturated fat as a percentage of total calories. Once you get north of that, you're going to start to see LDL if you're susceptible to that. And only a percentage of the population has difficulty with LDL clearance. But if you can keep the total saturated fat down, obviously I don't include them because I'm allergic to them, which doesn't give me the right to, like if somebody's allergic to dairy, they can't say that, no, not everybody should have dairy. Same thing would be true of eggs or shellfish or peanuts. I always made that distinction that it's individualistic and dose dependent. So I've had to be cautious about how, and in my book, I updated from, where I originally came out 5 years ago, and that was largely from, Weston A. Price's recommendation and Chris Masterjohn. And I couldn't get any of them to defend their position.
Really?
I repeatedly reached out to them. I couldn't get them to defend their position. The one person who defended the position was Tucker Goodrich. Actually went on Mark Bell's show. Mark asked me, this is funny, and Alan Flanagan from Alinea Nutrition is just in the last couple of years has really kind of put himself into a leadership position where he's such a bright, brilliant guy in terms of just his knowledge about nutrition. He has a PhD in nutrition. But he's the one who came out with the article, and he's kind of the thought leader now. I see everybody else. I follow everybody's accounts on social media. You name them, I'm following them. I'm subscribing to their. I'm reading. I'm watching. I sit over here quietly, as you've seen today in my reference of all these folks and kind of their evolution, including mine, and they've all evolved. The folks from Barbara Medicine commonly recognize things that they used to think that they've changed their opinion on. Lane Norton's the same way. He used to promote saturated fat as being healthy and put forth some research on that effect. The guys from examine.com as recently as last year, they have 14 PhDs over there. I'm just a meat neck powerlifter. And they were promoting that saturated fat was not deleterious to cardiovascular disease.
Well, the dose makes the poison with that one, right?
The dose makes the poison. Yeah. And they've since updated that to recognize that, And so I don't feel too bad if it took me a little longer than most on some of these topics. But Tucker Goodrich went on to Mark Bell's show and had a debate with Alan Flanagan about this very topic. And he was the only one, to his credit, although I think Alan Flanagan's research and the evidence as a whole supports that position that canola oil can in replacing saturated fats provide an improved LDL and then therefore cardiovascular disease outcome.
I've seen studies though that show that although that may happen, all-cause mortality actually gets a little worse in some of those studies. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah.
Are those like iffy or?
They are very iffy. I think one was Michigan and one was in Australia.
Yeah.
Alan addressed those, and I could pull them up here. I've got all the information, but they were very iffy. They were I think that there was trans fats involved in that study.
Right.
It was one of the problems.
Which we know are pretty much any dose, not good.
That was a huge problem. I think that was called the Minnesota coronary trial. I think was one.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. I've since moved on from that topic. Like I said, I reached out to all the people who had most fervently opposed, and they wouldn't challenge that. So I've since moved on.
Stan, wouldn't you say one of the challenges with studies on nutrition is that we have very little, or very few, I should say, long-term controlled dietary studies. They're just so expensive. There's no funding. So a lot of this is like observational for the most part. And when you look at observational studies, there's cultures that eat diets that looks radically different from other cultures. And you see the health is very similar, which points back to what you said in the beginning, which is like 95% of the benefits come from eating a reduced calorie diet.
Itself and exercise. I mean, we see this even in, like, I hate talking about the blue zones because there's so much confounding there as well.
That's true.
It's so cherry picked. And a lot of those zones, the birth certificate information is hard to validate.
Oh, that's funny.
So some of those guys aren't 100, they're 80.
You know why, by the way? Because in some of these countries, they would lie on the birth certificate so they could get pensions
from their parents. Money from 100%. Yeah.
So they acted older, or they pretended to be older.
Oh, yeah, that's funny.
Yeah, and I'm happy to provide a resource in reference to that review as well. But I guess the point of that whole conversation is that yes, A, they're very cherry picked, but B, you look at who are the groups in California, Loma Linda?
The Seventh-day Adventists.
The Seventh-day Adventists, but right up the street, you've got the Mormons.
Yeah.
Who have equivalent health outcomes with meat in their diet.
Right.
And somehow they're just magically, not in the blue zones. And remember, the blue zones is not a study, it's a book.
Right.
That was I think highly biased and cherry picked. But the point being is the dietary pattern of the Mormons, or the lifestyle pattern of the Mormons, is more important. So when I talk about dietary patterns as opposed to individual foods, and I talked about the healthy user bias, the Mormons don't smoke, they don't drink, they exercise regularly, they maintain a lower BMI and waist measurement, they generally exercise more, they have better social environments. So all of those things seem to take a priority over whether or not you're having some red meat. I will say this, though. I will say that sufficient fiber does seem to show a decrease in cancer risk. And Lane has referred to a number of some research suggests if you get adequate fiber with your meat intake, and again as a portion of a dietary pattern, that it's fine. The only reason I keep harping on it is because specifically with women, I find, and I was just this summer, I was up in Arizona and I was working with a high school softball team. And a couple of parents told me that the girls had had a decline in performance recently. And that's very common. I was working with the University of Oregon track team back in the early 90s. And one of the things that we saw most was shin splints. And we saw that with the Nike coach. It was highly popularized, or that a couple of his athletes had significant health issues. Comes from the female triad. And that's, a calorie restriction, resulting in anemia, amenorrhea, osteopenia. And so sure enough, that's the first question I asked is she had a blood test, and they went and got her blood test. Sure enough, she was anemic. And I see that women who are in a severe calorie restriction, who trend towards carbs and insufficient protein, and they avoid dairy and red meat, they have a higher incidence of those problems. And so that's kind of why I keep hounding on having red meat in the diet, not exclusively, but certainly don't exclude it, don't demonize it, or dairy for the calcium benefits. And so within probably a week or 10 days, she was feeling amazing. We just, the resolution for low iron would be to use a heme iron source, a non-heme iron source with vitamin C, and avoid calcium in that meal.
So you had her eat meat.
So we designed a diet for her that included steak, spinach, and peppers or oranges. So that was heme, non-heme, vitamin C. And we avoided dairy in that specific meal because it can inhibit absorption in that meal. And then her next meal would, say, be eggs with yogurt. And so 2 times a day she would have the high iron. And within, it was probably a week.
That's phenomenal.
What was she following a particular diet before that?
No, that's the problem with a lot of high school athletes. She
was just trying to stay lean, so she was eating low calorie.
They avoid the trigger foods that they see that, I'm not going to eat red meat, I'm not going to eat dairy, I'm not going to eat fruit. And then they end up just on bagels, and occasional, egg white or something like that. So insufficient protein is probably the primary driver, chronic calorie restriction. And then those other items, red meat and the dairy.
Do you think a big problem with just health and wellness is that people, they just want that silver bullet answer. They just want just tell me like the best exercise or just tell me the best food. And really the data is becoming so clear that there is no specific, unless you're talking to a specific individual and you're breaking them down, like you said with this young lady, with her, there were specific foods. But it's impossible.
Well, we already said it. The best exercise is the one you'll do. The best best diet's the one you'll follow. And those are truthful but not useful. The individual has to be provided. So I say, my clients say, Stan, just tell me exactly what to eat. And I base that on all the things that we've discussed this far, and then try and cater that to their personal preferences so that they can comply with it. More whole foods, more protein, better sleep. That's why the vertical diet isn't just diet. It's diet, sleep, exercise.
I don't think humans are partial to. I don't think that it's just exercise. I think it's everything.
Everything.
I think want the silver.
I hate the dichotomy. Again, I hate that we have to.
It's
what's better than the other.
But that's how the human brain works, right? That we first want to use the quick monkey brain. Just give me the direction. Tell me the 3 things really fast. To switch over to the second phase, right, of the brain. You have to process. You have to think. You have to sit down. You have to slow. Like nobody wants to do that. I think it's less about exercise. It's more about human behavior,
100%,
and the way we process all information.
It's about compliance. It's about creating. If it's a diet, then what's the least restrictive to you? How are you the least hungry? That's why people say, "Well, I started doing intermittent fasting and it worked." And they're adamant about it. They're religious about it. It worked for you because you didn't feel you weren't hungry on it. Same thing with keto. Keto works for me, and that's great. I think that's fine for those reasons. You mentioned a little earlier, what things do I watch out for?
Yeah.
And those are some of the things I'm cautious of, is that people get themselves into an over-restrictive environment that's not necessarily sustainable long-term. I do see some issues with keto diets, and again, they can work. I think it's a good initial intervention for somebody with type 2 diabetes in particular, so long as they can get a calorie deficit, lose weight, because they don't obviously assimilate carbohydrates sufficiently. But I get about 4 to 6 weeks in on most keto diets. And it's not like I haven't done keto diets multiple times. I worked with Dave Palumbo 10 years ago.
He's the keto king,
yeah, he's the keto king. I've done keto many times throughout my career in preparing for a show. I always got weaker. I always got more tired. I always lost more muscle. And that's kind of what I see. Now, we can try and mitigate some of that, obviously, with the training and the protein intake and sufficient electrolytes. That's kind of the first thing that happens with the water loss from the carbohydrate depletions that we see. They lose 5, 6, 7 pounds of water. And then they lose all the sodium associated with that water, and then they start to get tired as a result. So we can mitigate some of that. And then I have to also, I like to get the blood test. Let's see your LDLs. You want to go keto, cautious, what the fatty, what kind of fats that are in there, maybe more salmons, more avocado, more nuts, more, in a case like that, as opposed to these fat bombs and the butter in your coffee, because, the LDL is a consideration.
Yeah. So I want to change gears a little bit and move into exercise. Because I've wanted to ask you this because you're a smart guy. You've been doing this for a long time, so you have a lot of experience and I would say wisdom. And so you've been doing this long enough to now see some of these trends. I'm now reading mainstream articles that are saying things like strength training may be the key to longevity. We talked earlier about the strength metric, right? Squeezing a grip test is actually, in terms of single metrics, is one of the best predictors of all-cause mortality. We're seeing now that they're advocating for strength training to fight dementia, to manage type 2 diabetes. Is strength training starting to have its it's time? Is the time started finally here where we're going to finally start talking about this to the average person?
Yeah, and I think we were kind of touching on that a moment ago before I got sidetracked. Is that the longevity people? Dr. Peter is one of the leaders in the industry that I think has come a long way in terms of the caliber of people that he's been bringing to his show. Obviously, Lane Norton most recently, and that's what the consensus seems to be now amongst the academic professionals. Obviously, the meat neck nerds. We've always hoped that would be the case. We want validation for this obsession that we've had all our lives. And I'm not suggesting everybody should be a competitive powerlifter or bodybuilder, but they should certainly lift. And here's the important distinction. I was just talking to Mike O'Hearn last week or the week before about this. We were talking about cardio and strength training, and I'm not sure if it was just kind of the first time this topic had really come up, and I'm not sure if I had very very well, I think, articulated the position. But what we do see is it's the health benefits, the lifespan and health span benefits are dependent upon the results more than the activity. And by that, I mean that people who just exercise more don't realize the same longevity benefits as those who have better metrics of having exercise, such as VO2 max and, like you said, strength and lean mass.
So it's not just working out. It's are you getting results?
100%.
Are you adapting?
Are you
your bodybuilding?
Are you building muscle?
100%.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
And that's important. And then look, again, what's the best exercise? The one you'll do. At some point, if you're training a client and they're not getting stronger or gaining lean muscle mass or improving their VO2 max, then again, exercise is great, but they're not getting all the benefits that they may be intending to get just from doing the work itself. That should be measurable and progressible.
Agree. And in fact, I'll take it even a step further. If you're exercising a lot and you're not noticing improvements in your physical performance, muscle, maybe fat loss, blood lipids, in fact, you may actually be causing detrimental effects because it's now just a stress. Because the exercise is the stressor that causes the adaptation. It's the adaptation you get the benefits from, not the stressor itself. The stressor by itself is just a stressor.
And we know that as coaches of athletes.
Yes. The overtraining is a big issue, right?
100%. Yeah, fatigue management. Like you said, especially athletes who aren't bodybuilders or powerlifters. The last thing you want to do is influence or adversely impact their ability to perform whatever sport or whatever practice for that sport that they have to engage in. I worked with John Jones recently, and that was one of the biggest things we did. It was funny because we would do,
What was that like, by the way, working with him?
Oh, it was great. He's a phenomenal athlete.
He's got really good strength and muscle building genes, which I didn't even realize because he always looks kind of long and lanky.
It's incredible, yeah. The hard part was, we just got him up over 250 pounds was the goal, 255 pounds.
Holy cow, I didn't know that.
The hard part with him was the eating, and we can, just briefly, I'll say that John kind of likes to eat what he wants to eat when he wants to eat, which like a lot of my clients. And so, I would send him meals, but he wouldn't necessarily enjoy them consistently, and getting him just to eat breakfast. So those were some of the hard challenges with John. And so that's the first question I asked. What do you like to eat? Where do you like to eat? So we started going to the restaurants that he liked to eat at. And I've said this many times before that sometimes clients who don't have an opportunity to make their food and have to eat out, I'll just Google the restaurant menu and pick a few things on there that I think are optimal. I do this with high school kids. I did this for the softball team because they are a traveling team. And I said, look, you can go to any of these different places, whether it's Carl's Jr. or McDonald's, and because that's what you're going to do anyhow. Let's make the optimal choice. And for me, I just look for a 2-to-1 protein to fat ratio. Generally, that's a chicken source because most of the meats at those places are 75-25 beef, and you have a really hard time meeting those requirements. But a Subway sandwich, you get a meatball sandwich, is not as much protein and a lot of fat. But if you get the steak or the grilled chicken breast, throw a little bit of cheese on there.
Double meat.
Double meat. Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And that's kind of how I do that. But aside from that, I can remember we posted a video of John doing some, it was like pin squats or chain squats where you go down and you let the eccentric kind of crash into the weights and you just do the concentric portion. Right. And you don't necessarily do a full range of motion with a 6'5" guy with
Sure,
wingspan like him, because that is just going to create a lot more damage. And in terms of sports performance, I only need,
That's right.
I don't need the full range of motion for sports performance, because I've always said that if he's at full range of motion, he's losing the fight.
That's right.
I just want him to be explosive. So I posted that, and of course that went on to ESPN, Fight News, or whatever else on Instagram, and all the fucking internet experts, are in there like, do a full squat, and he's going to hurt himself, and it's like. So we design programs for athletes that might not look like a bodybuilder's program or a powerlifter's program, because we're trying to eliminate a lot of the fatigue and the eccentric loading.
Since you brought up John Jones, I want to hear your prediction, because right away when you said the challenges with the diet and adherence and stuff like that, I actually have found this very common with many athletes, especially training high level athletes, because they have been able to burn up whatever they consume, and they are great at their sport, and so they don't want to disrupt that. So when you see this, and especially when you get a chance to coach them and you're trying to get them to adhere, and you see them struggle, if you had to predict the things that John Jones is going to be challenged with in 20, 25 years, when he's no longer fighting, playing his sports, and moving and burning as many calories, what would you predict and see would happen?
Boy, I think the same thing everybody has to happen. You burn fewer calories and you eat more is what happens. People think their metabolic rate slows, but we've seen now from the research between age 20 and probably 60, we don't see a significant decline in metabolic rate. We see people move less and they eat more. And that's, I think, and that's the folly of a lot of athletes, particularly football players. You see them post-football, man, they're used to eating a lot of food because they were doing daily doubles for 4 hours a day of training.
I think that's a lot of the reason why their lifespan is so low is because I know, like, we want to connect it to the hard hitting and the stress in the body, which I'm sure that's not helping the case whatsoever. No, but I would make the case that a lot of it is they've built these eating behaviors around a body that is burning 6,000-7,000 calories every day in
but now we got to say, look, people's metabolisms are different. We kind of had this conversation a little bit about some people who have a harder time losing weight than others. Right. We see in overfeeding studies, generally speaking, people will gain weight. But if you look at the inter-individual responses to overfeeding studies, you'll see that one person might gain 20 pounds. One person might lose 4. Yeah. And they both had an equivalent calorie surplus throughout that study. I'm that guy. I'll lose weight. I have to do everything I can to maintain my weight. And so if you ask me where I'm going to be in 20 years, I'm going to be lighter. John's kind of the same way. I'm
the same way as you are. Yeah. Like if I don't stay on top of my protein intake, especially, and calories, I'll lose weight on the scale, and it feels and looks like muscle. I
went down to Dallas or Wichita Falls to Mark Ripeto's over the weekend to do a seminar. He had a gathering of all of his starting strength people. He's doing phenomenal. I mean, he's got like 30 gyms open nationwide now, the starting strength group. And I love Mark and their method. I think it's fantastic. They're doing a great job for the very kind of people that we're talking about, just to increase strength. And that's been his foundation. And I know he's gruff and, but that's his goal. He just wants people to get stronger, 5 pounds a week, and he's been clear about that for 20 years. But I left on a Friday afternoon. I came back on a Sunday morning, and I took all my meals with me, and I lost 4 pounds just from the travel. And I know a lot of people, they'll hate on that because, like, my wife's Samoan. She looks
grass is always greener on the other side. That's what I tell them.
But then for my sport, trying to gain weight, and that's kind of one of the challenges I deal with say, like a Hafthor Bjornsson or Lane Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah. It's harder to eat enough to maintain that mass and that workload and that, I think Lane was 312 pounds and he needed to be 330. When I started working with him, he had a registered dietitian do a diet for him. And this is not an indictment on registered dietitians. My co-author for the Vertical Diet is Dr. Damon McCune, who's a PhD RDN, was director of dietetics for UNLV. That dietitian recommended chicken breast and quinoa, like 5 cups of quinoa a day. And I mean, has anybody ever eaten 5 cups of quinoa a day? And so, and some that kind of gets me off into this thought that, I mean, if you haven't done it, why are you prescribing it for somebody? If you haven't eaten 6,000 calories a day, of the foods that you're recommending for this individual, or at least tried, to eat in a surplus, then be cautious about your confidence in that prescription, because Lane couldn't eat it and he was having all kinds of problems, obviously. So, that was one of the things. I was able to get him up to 330 pounds just using, obviously, easier to digest foods.
Which you have to, is a huge consideration when you're eating that much food, is can you digest it well?
100%. Yeah. And that's why, people are like, oh, white rice. It's like, nobody in a calorie deficit on the vertical diet eats white rice, because you're utilizing fruits and vegetables and high potassium foods as the foundation. It's only the people who have a significant workload or lots of lean body mass who need 4,000 plus calories and can't consume a ton of pasta and oats or bread in that quantity, because it bloats them and makes it hard for them to consume all the food. We saw the same thing with Brian Shaw, and I worked with him. Like a week into the diet, he's like, Stan, I'm hungry. I haven't been hungry in years.
Oh, wow.
And that's because we used, the Monster Mash, more easy, mechanically speaking, foods you could shovel down and, in greater quantities faster, would digest quicker, you'd be hungry again sooner, and then you could eat again.
So it's very similar to what we talked about earlier with weight loss. When you're looking at weight loss, your considerations are satiety. Is it going to be something sustainable? It's the same thing with people trying to gain, is can we manage satiety? It's just in the opposite direction, right? Can we give you foods that don't stuff you and keep you so full because you got to eat 5,000 calories?
And for those people, and I know this is a small percentage, it's so funny when I do these seminars, I've got a broad spectrum of people, weight loss, weight gain, people with medical conditions, et cetera. And I start talking about weight gain. I know I've turned off about 90%, and most of the women in the room are, they see me work with a Brian Shaw and a Hafthor Bjornsson, and they're like, they don't want to be there, And so I got to start throwing up the Nadia Wyatts, at 114 pounds, or I've got a girl, BJ, that competes at like 114, eats 2,600 calories a day.
Wow.
Yeah, she's a machine. But when I met her 3 years ago, she was on 1,200 calories a day. That was a long, slow process of getting her body, getting her to build muscle and improve her metabolism.
Stan, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
Be 55 next month.
Holy cow. Yeah. So let me ask you this, because you've been doing this for so long. Personally, how has your training changed, or do you have different considerations now that you're in your mid-50s? What does that
100%.
look like?
Mostly, obviously, your recovery starts to take longer from high fatigue movements. So a lot of the workouts you see me do recently, this is funny because I haven't competed in over 10 years. And so, and for a few years after I stopped competing, I thought about one more. And so I was going in there and I was doing the heavy squats and the heavy deadlifts more frequently with too many north of 90% efforts. And I was just tired all the time. My shoulders and elbows and knees were still wrecked. And I talked about this on my videos for Keys to Pain-Free Knees, and I broke my back. Those are my rants where I spoke about how you resolve those issues. But how I train differently now is I do fewer of those top-end sets, and I try and do lower fatigue movements. And I do a lot more volume, as kind of Louis Simmons thing. And probably what really got me through my career as both bodybuilding and powerlifting is that the bodybuilding, I did a ton more volume, more sets, more reps, shorter rest periods. And so my cardiovascular fitness was really good. And it kind of carried me through those powerlifting preps, and was able to maintain my health to the best of my abilities. I gained and lost the weight. That's why I periodize my big athletes' weight. The first thing I did with Hafthor Bjornsson was take him from 440 down to in the 390s to resolve some fatty liver and insulin resistance that we saw in the blood test. So I periodize their weight with their competitions throughout the year. I don't let them stay heavy while they're not competing heavy. Mass moves mass, so I do get them back up in weight. But I'm kind of the same way. I try and minimize fatigue. So my training now, CT Fletcher reached out to me last month and he said, hey, are you still deadlifting? And I wasn't really, and certainly not heavy. I'm like 600 pounds was a heavy deadlift for me a month or two ago.
Oh, that's so light.
3 months ago.
Yeah. For him it is, right?
I know.
It's embarrassing for me to talk about. Nowadays I talk about, I'm a member of the AARP now because I'm so old. So I talk about my AARP PRs. This is my post-retirement PRs, my PR PRs. And he said, hey, would you come down and deadlift at my meet in January? And, it's CT Fletcher. You don't say no to CT. He's a legend. And so I said, sure, I'll come down. And then I hung up the phone and I realized, shit, I can't deadlift anything. I'm going to go embarrass myself down there. So I wanted to start deadlifting heavy. So I couldn't just go deadlift heavy. So I used accessories. And the two that I've been doing a lot now, you see me do recently in the last month or two, is box squats. That tends to give you less fatigue. Plus, it eliminates that portion of the lift, as I mentioned with John Jones, where you're reversing the weight. That eliminates some of the eccentric at that muscle length. That's going to give you a lot of muscle soreness. And so, plus it also dissipates that stretch reflex, which is, what a deadlift is.
You don't have that, right?
You don't have it. You got to create tension there. So I love the box squat for that reason. Plus it's low fatigue. The next day I don't feel crushed. I can do 600-pound box squats and I don't feel crushed, with the using the Kabuki bar right now. And then I'll do good mornings as another accessory for deadlifts. But on to chains, as I mentioned earlier, same thing I did with John, something I do with athletes is I try to eliminate some of the eccentric load and just do the concentric portion, crash, bring it down. You can see all this on the Instagram. I've posted a lot of, and people are like, oh my God, doesn't that hurt? And I'm like, actually it hurts less than doing a true good morning or a true squat, particularly the next day. But I do need to build, obviously I need to progress those loads over time so it could translate to a deadlift.
Such a smart strategy.
Yeah, I'll work up and just do a couple of top sets of the box squats or a few top sets and then once a month I'll try and test my deadlift to see if these are. I said it has to be measurable, progressible, but it also has to be transferable. This is something that's very important when you're talking about athletes. If they're not getting faster or jumping higher or throwing further, then you're wasting their time. It's exercise, not training. And so for me, I use the deadlift as a test. So once a month, I try and see, did I get stronger? And you can either move the same weight faster or you can add some more weight and test that for yourself. And then I also add a ton of volume to that. I have to keep those 50, 60% loads in and just move a lot. I do the 4 bikes a day still on the recumbent bike, as I mentioned, for 10 minutes.
So you do 10 minutes 4 times a day?
10 minutes 4 times a day. Did this morning at the hotel, walked around. And then I try and get a lot of volume in. So sometimes I'll split my workouts where I'll come in the morning, I'll do the box squatting, and then maybe do a bunch of belt squats, walking lunges, things like that, just to keep moving. Sled drags, I just keep moving. And then come to find out all these many years later, I had never met Louis Simmons out at Westside until just a couple of years ago. But Mark Bell's obviously a Louis Simmons Westside style training, so I utilized those methods with him. But one of the things I found out through my buddy Matt Whittemer out at Beat Training, who competed for Louis for over 10 years, and he was a student of Buddy Morris. He coached. He did strength and conditioning coaching in the NFL for Buddy Morris, who's those people who know in the NFL, he's just a legend for strength and conditioning. Come to find out that was behind the scenes. I don't think people appreciate that was Louis' philosophy, whether or not all of his athletes achieved that, was that they had to have a pretty high level of fitness. They had to do a decent amount of volume outside of their heavy stuff, whether it was the sled drags or just repeating maybe on 90-second intervals, repeating sets of 5 at 50, 60% or some band tension. But it develops I think a really good GPP, so they call it general physical preparedness, so that I'm able to do more and recover from it better if I have that foundation.
So lower intensity, but more volume or maybe more frequency.
Yeah, fewer 90+%.
Yeah.
And even with those, I try and deload the highest fatigue portion of the movement, testing once a month, and then lots of volume, if that summarizes.
I'm finding the same thing. I'm training most of my body almost every day, but the total volume per workout is less, but the total volume per week is actually quite high.
Yeah.
And I feel better.
And I'll split some of those because I can't train for an hour and a half straight. I dig too deep a hole. I say we're not digging ditches, we're building mountains. And so I try and get in and out of the gym in less than an hour if I can.
So if you're going to have a long, if you're going to do an hour and a half of workout, you'll do half and then half.
Yeah.
Great.
I'll come back at night and do another 30, 35 minutes.
Great. All right, one last thing. How's your business going? How's everything going?
It's fantastic. Everything's been going good. I've been blessed. I've had a fantastic following. And I was just watching some more videos today of people who say that the more information they put out there, and I think we might have talked about this many, many years ago, same thing, you've got the same philosophy you had and still have, is that we just give people as much content and much information, and it comes back to you tenfold. A very loyal group. I mentioned that my business partner in my meal prep company passed away recently. He struggled with obesity and alcoholism, and he ultimately had kidney failure, and he passed away in his 50s. It was sad, but and so I had to find a new provider, and it took about 4 months. I was completely down. I wasn't able to serve any meals.
Oh, wow.
We had been very successful for over 4 years. I had a very loyal clientele with the vertical diet meal prep that would order meals from me every week. And it was fantastic. And I was very grateful. And I had to send them all an email and let them know, hey, we're down and I'm working hard. I'll try and get back up as soon as I can. Of course, that always takes longer and costs more than you ever anticipate. But in fact, we're back up as of 3 weeks ago, and 60% of my clientele's already come back just in 3 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah, and I'm just so grateful to have that group. It's it's folks who I've said before that I've probably, I've been in 14 countries in all 50 states in the last 5 years doing seminars, over 200 seminars. And 2 summers ago, I did that 60 cities in 60 days tour. I did a seminar every night, and I did all 48 states plus DC. I did 60 seminars in 60 days, drove over 16,000 miles in an RV, doing a seminar every night all over the country. I'd mapped out a little path. And I met thousands of people over that trip, as I've met thousands and thousands more throughout the course of my career. But I've also received probably over 100,000 DMs in the last 5 years, as you guys get them all the time as well. And I do my best to try and respond to the vast majority of them with a specific answer, maybe a link, a copy paste of an article that's relevant to the topic that they've asked about. And that kind of thing, not hiding that behind a paywall, which I may still do someday, so I should be careful, get out in front of myself here. But I don't have a Patreon or a paywall or anything like that. And I've just put everything I know into my vertical diet ebook, and it's now on volume 3.0, and then 4.0 is coming out next month. I've been saying that for a year. And it really is. It's just a living document that is, I just compile almost everything everybody asks me. If it's not in my ebook, I add it. And so that's how it continues to expand and grow to now over 225 pages and more than 500 references to peer-reviewed articles and videos and researches, just because people ask me those questions and I want to have answers for them. And I try and provide them, the best information possible and provide them references and resources to where they can get closer to their resolution.
Well, Stan, since he brought up the business thing, I do want you to touch on something that I thought was really interesting. I heard you and Bill, you kind of, and you guys just lightly went over this, so I'd like you to go maybe in a little bit deeper. But how has strength training and training in general played a role in making millions of dollars for you?
Yeah, I've said ever since I'm pretty OCD, obsessive compulsive. I've always been kind of a routines guy, and that bodybuilding when I got to college was probably the best thing for me. I was diagnosed as a kid, and they wanted to put me on medication, but I was a no-go for that. But when I got into bodybuilding, everything seemed to work for me because there's so much routine and regimen and
consistency
everything is mapped out for your entire day. You're eating every 2 or 3 hours depending on what era you're in. It used to be 2, now it's 3. And it's a particular type of meal with this, that, and the other, and your training and your cardio or whatever it is. You have this schedule and this routine that's so consistent. It bode well for me. And there was always some sort of progression involved. You always, whether it was bodybuilding or powerlifting, you were trying to achieve a particular goal. And you would keep repeating those behaviors that worked. And you would, from trial and error or education, you would start to discard those things that didn't work. Same thing came true for business. I said this in a video years ago, that if people would spend any bodybuilder, powerlifter, successful athlete would apply the same level of discipline, consistency, and time management into any income-producing venture, they'd be a millionaire in 5 years. And that's just because of repeating successful behaviors and having such a rigid, consistent schedule. I think most people just kind of get distracted.
I think paired with patience also, right? I think that's something that bodybuilding teaches you. Like, you don't get to just overnight look like you. No. It doesn't take weeks, it doesn't take months, it takes years and years of consistency. And I think we have that same kind of attitude a lot of times when we say we want to be rich, or I want to have the biggest podcast in the world, or you just say a statement like that, but you don't realize all the steps that
It's
you
gonna
have
take
to
a long
take,
time.
and how long you need to be
Takes a long
consistent
time.
at those before you
And
actually
the
start to reap those
consistency
benefits.
is huge, because we see that with Mark Bell. I mean, I've told this story before. When I met Mark back in 2009 and I was training with him, he was in a little 800 square foot alcove off the side of a CrossFit box, and they were going to raise his rent $400 a month. And he came to me and said, "Look, I'm going to have to shut the gym down." I said, "I can't afford it." And he was driving this beat up old car with the hubcaps missing, and he was driving 30 minutes each way so he could be in a neighborhood he could afford to live in outside of Sacramento. And he just started putting up content, and he just kept doing it. He was relentless about it every single day, from, before YouTube was popular, and certainly before Instagram or TikTok ever existed. And he was just so consistent about it. And look what he's built in the process. Plus, he's real. That's another thing. When I first started doing my Rhinos rants, I thought, well, what's my character going to be? And I'm not CT Fletcher, and I'm not Mark Bell. I don't have that WWE thing. I don't have the F-bomb thing. It's just not my thing. And I'm like, I'm pretty boring. I'm pretty blue collar at heart. I'm, kind of a nerd on this stuff. And I thought, and I just decided I just have to be me. And people took to it very well. I didn't have to pretend to be anything else, and my Rhinos rants have been kind of my most successfully viewed content that I've put out there, other than the fact that I whore myself out to every podcast that calls me. I'm like, sure. You guys are like, "Hey, Stan, can you come?" I'm like, "All right.
Yeah, I'll be there."
And she said, what did she say? It was a month ago. And she said, like, "Well, they have an availability at the end of September." I'm like, "Yeah, like they're busy for a month. Like they're booked out for a month. Can I come up tomorrow?" Did she show you our correspondence?
No.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
It was hilarious.
We don't do our schedules.
Yeah.
It was hilarious. Yeah.
Oh,
Well,
good stuff.
well, good deal, man. Well,
Hey, sorry to keep soaking up your time here, but
sure.
one thing I want to talk about that it's hugely important for parents and kids alike. I just recently started a kids power hour, vertical kids power hour at the Sin City Iron. I recently invested in and I'm part owner of Sin City Iron in Las Vegas. And I started this kids power hour primarily because I wanted my kids to lift weights. And so I set it up, so that I'd be there. And now we've got 25 kids from ages, I say kindergarten to college. And sure enough, a bunch of 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds. There's this one 12-year-old kid that's like, his dad's like 6'7", 380, and this kid's already like 6 foot, 260.
Holy
at
cow.
12 years old. The kid's huge. Yeah, he's just a monster. But there's also a little 5-year-old girl that comes in, and I have her pick up a little pink kettlebell and do 5 reps of. The point being is that the American Academy of Pediatrics has a position statement that weightlifting for kids is essential. Brad Schoenfeld recently posted that even as early as 5 to 7 years old.
about time.
Improves bone mineral density. Obviously, they're not going to build the muscle mass, but they get their neural adaptation and hence, therefore, a strength adaptation from the training. All of these guys have been crushing the old myth that somehow weightlifting was bad for kids and might stunt their growth. And just the opposite is true. It actually limits injury in other sports. It's less injurious than other sports, certainly any contact sport. In fact, the number one injury, 65% of injuries that occur in the gym is simply dropping a weight on yourself. So I set all those up ahead of time so the kids don't have to touch any weights. But we bring them in and we teach them to squat, bench, and deadlift. And we tell them the goal is progression over time.
That's great.
That's cool.
And I just think that parents should know that that it's the foundation of any sport. If you want to run faster, jump higher, and throw further, building strength, lifting weights like every high school and collegiate athlete does, can be started in junior high school or before, and it's perfectly healthy. And again, increasing bone mineral density for girls in particular should be started as early as possible, because that becomes harder and harder to do as they age.
It's interesting you bring that up. Literally yesterday, I was actually just looking up this franchise that I'm really interested in right now. It's relatively new. It's called Kids Strong.
Heard of it?
Have you heard of it?
Yeah, they're fantastic.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, and I definitely think that there's an opportunity there, not only for a great business, but to help a ton of people And there's not a lot of people in that space, so it's pretty cool that you're moving that direction. But yeah, just literally yesterday, I was like diving through all their stuff because I was interested in potentially investing in something like that.
It's the foundation.
Yeah,
100%.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that last part. Thanks.
Yeah.
And thanks for coming on, Stan.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Good times.
Appreciate it.
Always great. This one's really important, and that is to phase your training. If somebody trains for a full year doing a bench press and they're always aiming for 5 reps, if you compared that person to a person who did bench press where they did 3 or 4 weeks of 5 reps, but then they did 3 or 4 weeks of 12 reps and then 3 or 4 weeks of, let's say, 15 to 20 reps, and then they'll throw in some supersets. At the end of that year, you're going to see more consistent progress from the person who's moving in and out. And less injury. That's another thing. You'll see less injury as well.